call your first witness.
Your Honor, the defense would like to call Tanya Morgan to the stand.
Miss Morgan, please approach the witness stand. Bailiff, please swear in the witness.
You solemnly swear to tell the truth, nothing but the truth, beside what? You say your first name, spell the last.
Defense, you may begin your questioning now.
May I approach the stand?
Yes, you may, Morgan.
Good morning, Miss Morgan. I am defending Brad Stevens. To be nervous is perfectly normal, but I want you to relax. There's nothing to be afraid of. I'm going to ask you some questions, and all I would like is the complete, honest truth. Miss Morgan, if at any time you do not understand a question or did not hear me clearly, please do say something. Miss Morgan, do you attend school?
Yes.
Miss Morgan, where do you attend school?
South High School.
Miss Morgan, do you know what perjury is?
Yes.
Can you tell me what it is?
It's lying.
Yes, thank you. Can you, Miss Morgan, recall the night of June 4th, 1994?
Yeah.
Did you, Miss Morgan, go out that evening?
Yes, I did.
Miss Tanya Morgan, how long have you known Mr. Stevens?
Not that long.
Can you point Mr. Stevens out to me, please? Thank you. Would the jury please note that the witness has just identified the defendant?
The record will show.
Is there any reason, Miss Morgan, you would lie to protect Mr. Stevens?
No.
Do you remember approximately what time Brad Stevens picked you up that evening?
At 7:30.
Miss Morgan, what did you and Brad do at the arcade?
I watched Brad play Frogger.
Miss Morgan, would you please speak a little bit louder so the jury members can hear you?
Did you, Miss Morgan, ever leave the Frogger machine?
Yes, we did. When Brad thought he can get a higher score on Frogger. We didn't have any change, so we went to go get change.
Miss Morgan, did he ever get that higher score?
No, he did not.
Why didn't he?
Well, when we came back, Martin Man and Connie Cook were occupying the game.
Did Martin Mann at any time show any offense to Mr. Brad Stevens? Would you like me to repeat that question? Okay, did Martin Mann show any aggression or harm toward Brad Stevens at that time?
Well,
Yeah, let me repeat it for you one more time.
I understand the question. Well, when Brad suggested that he go play another game, Martin came back sarcastically and told him that he should go play Pac-Man.
Okay, is that all he did, Ms. Conley?
Well, no, he got upset when Brad tried to finish playing his game, so he pushed him down.
Can you verify me, Ms. Morgan, if Brad was hurt when he was pushed down?
Yes, he was.
Let the court show that Brad Stevens was indefinitely hurt when he fell.
The record will show.
That must have been a really hard push, Tanya Morgan. I'm going to ask you again. Would you lie for Mr. Brad Stevens?
No.
Would you please speak up, Miss Morgan?
No.
Did Mr. Stevens try to fight back at this time? Did Mr. Stevens try to fight back at this time?
No, he was hurt.
Were there any verbal threats made by either Brad or Martin Mann at this time?
Yeah, so me and Connie Cook pulled Martin back. He threatened to beat Brad up next time he saw him.
Okay, Miss Morgan, did you leave with Brad at this time?
From the machine or?
Leave the video arcade?
No, we did not.
Where did you go?
We went to the drinking fountain to wipe off his scrapes.
Okay, is the drinking fountain near the door, Miss Tanya Morgan?
Yes.
Tanya Morgan, did Mr. Mann stay at the Frogger machine while you were at the drinking fountain?
No, Martin and Connie left the machine and were coming towards Brad very rapidly.
Okay. Why didn't Mr. Mann stay at the video game? Because after all, he did hurt an innocent person for it. Do you know?
Your Honor calls for an opinion.
Objection sustained. Members of the jury, please just provide the last question and answer.
When Mr. Mann was coming at Brad, did he ever reach for anything or do anything abrupt that would cause Brad Stevens or you to think that you were in any harm?
Yes, he reached in his back pocket and pulled out something.
Could you see what he was reaching for?
No, I couldn't.
Why couldn't you see what he was reaching for?
Well, the video arcade was dimly lit.
Your Honor, the witness needs to speak up a little louder.
Ms. Morgan, please speak up so that...
I know it's hard, but just really try to speak up so they can hear you in the back.
Okay. Miss Morgan, do you recall telling the court that Mr. Mann came at you and Brad very rapidly?
Yes.
Then, Miss Morgan, do you remember how Brad reacted to this angry stride displayed by Mr. Mann?
He panicked and he picked up the first thing he saw, which was a piece of wood.
Let the court show that she has just identified Prosecution Exhibit A.
The record was shown.
And then what did he do with that stick?
He hit Martin before he thought, well, he thought Martin was about to attack, so he hit him with it.
Miss Tanya Morgan, in the time you have known Brad, have you ever seen him act aggressively other than the night of June 4th?
No.
I'm going to ask you one last time. Would you, Miss Morgan, commit a crime by lying in court to protect Brad Stevens?
No.
No further questions, Your Honor.
Thank you. Prosecution, would you like to cross-examine the witness? Yes, you may approach the witness.
Hello, Ms. Morgan. How are you today? I know you may be a little nervous, but just relax and answer the questions as truthfully as possible. Isn't it true that you and Mr. Stevens were at Melanie's video arcade the night of June 4th, 1994?
Yes.
You were watching Mr. Stevens play, correct?
Yes.
Okay. Ms. Morgan, according to your previous statement, after Mr. Stevens finished his last game of Frogger, you both went to get changed some 30 feet away, correct?
Yes.
Now, if Brad was so interested in playing the game, he could have went himself, couldn't he have?
Yes.
Or couldn't he have sent you?
Yeah.
Okay. Well then, when you came back, you noticed Mr. Mann and Miss Cook playing the Frogger game, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Since you and Mr. Stevens were both gone, and Mr. Mann and Miss Cook had no way of knowing that you intended to return, am I correct?
Yeah.
Speak up, Ms. Morgan.
Yes.
When Mr. Stevens saw Mr. Mann, would you say that he was angry? Okay, when Mr. Stevens noticed that Mr. Mann was playing his game, did you notice that he was angry, or did you think he was angry?
Counselor, you need to speak up also. We can't hear you in the back. So project your voice out here.
When Mr. Stevens saw Mr. Mann, would you say that he was angry?
Yes.
Okay. So then you would say that Mr. Stevens approached Mr. Mann aggressively.
No, he was sarcastic, but he didn't approach.
Speak up, Ms. Morgan, please.
But isn't it true that he tried to shoulder his way between Mr. Mann and the machine?
Yes, he did.
So when Mr. Stevens was harassing Mr. Mann, you didn't try to stop him, did you?
When Brad was harassing?
Yeah.
He wasn't harassing him.
He was trying to shoulder his way between Mr. Mann and the machine. Did you try to stop him?
No, I didn't.
You allowed the situation to get out of control, didn't you?
I didn't allow it, no.
But you didn't interfere.
No.
Okay. When Mr. Stevens tripped over his own feet and fell, did you help him up right away?
He didn't trip over his feet. He was pushed
Can you
down.
answer the questions yes or no, please?
No.
Isn't it true that when Mr. Mann took a couple steps forward, he may have been trying to help Mr. Stevens up?
No.
Okay. And you grabbed his arm, didn't you?
Yes.
Okay. And so, Ms. Morgan, you may have prevented Mr. Mann from helping Mr. Stevens, am I correct?
No.
Mr. Morgan, Ms. Morgan, do you honestly think that if Mr. Mann had been intending to attack Mr. Stevens, that you could have been able to hold him back?
Yeah.
You could have held back an angry man? If Mr. Mann was intending to attack Mr. Stevens, could you have held him back?
No.
Okay. That's how she held him. Ms. Morgan, would you say that Mr. Stevens was angry when you were trying to help him wash his hand?
Repeat the question?
Okay, when Mr. Stevens was washing his hand, you were trying to help him, right? Was he angry?
Yes, he was.
Okay. So when he saw Mr. Mann walking towards the door, he was still angry, right?
Yeah.
Ms. Morgan, when Mr. Mann was walking towards the door, did you see what he had in his hand?
No, I did not.
Could it have been a knife?
Yes, it could have.
Okay. Let me show you Prosecution Exhibit C, the knife.
Do you recognize the knife, Ms. Morgan?
No.
Okay. Well, it was a wallet, Ms. Morgan. Prosecution Exhibit B. Hold that, please.
Recognize the wallet?
No.
Now that you have these in your hands, do you see any similarities? Let the record show that Ms. Morgan sees no similarities in these exhibits.
The record will show.
Put it back, please.
Please hand it.
So if you see no similarities now, how could you have known what he was pulling out of his wallet?
I did.
I mean, out of his pocket.
I did.
Okay, so then, would you say that Mr. Stevens had a right to be afraid?
Yeah.
Well, no further questions, Your Honor.
Thank you, Ms. Olson.
Oh, excuse me, can I have a 10-second recess to consult with my co-counsel?
Sure, go ahead. Ms. Morgan, I can't tell you.
Ms. Morgan, do you remember exactly what Brad Stevens hit Mr. Mann with?
A piece of wood.
Okay, and it's Exhibit A, right?
Yes.
Okay. One more question. Did you see the change machine when you were walking toward it?
Excuse me?
Did you see the change machine
When I was walking towards the change machine. Yes.
when you went to go get change? So you did see the change machine, right?
Yes.
So it couldn't have been that dimly lit because you did see the change machine. You did pull out your money and put it in, right?
Yeah.
Okay, no further questions, Your Honor.
Thank you, Ms. Olson. Ms. Morgan, you may be seated now. Defense, you may call your second witness. Quiet, please.
Your Honor, defense would like to call Mr. Sidney Berg to the stand.
Mr. Berg, please approach the witness stand.
You solemnly swear to tell the truth, nothing but the truth. Say I will.
I will.
Please say your first name, spell the last.
Cindy Berg, B-E-R-G.
Ms. Graham, you may begin your questioning.
May I approach the stand?
Yes, you may.
Good morning, Mr. Bergen. How are you this morning?
I'm fine.
That's good. I just want you to relax and answer questions truthfully. Mr. Berg, if you don't at any time understand what I have said, please ask and I will repeat the question. All right? Mr. Berg, do you work?
Yes, I do.
What is the name of the store you work in, Mr. Berg?
Big Wheel Motorcycle Shop.
Mr. Sidney Berg, what is your job position at Big Wheel Motorcycle Shop?
I'm the manager there.
Mr. Berg, do you understand what perjury is?
Yes, I do.
Would you ever commit perjury to protect anyone?
No, I would not.
Do you, Mr. Sidney Berg, know Brad Stevens?
Yes, I do know Brad Stevens.
Could you please point out Mr. Brad Stevens? Thank you. Would the court please note that the witness has just pointed out the defect?
The record will show.
Thank you, Your Honor. How long have you known Mr. Brad Stevens?
I've known Mr. Brad Stevens for about 3 months.
Did you meet Mr. Stevens through your business or elsewhere?
Through my business.
How long has Mr. Stevens worked for you?
He worked there about 3 months.
How is Brad with the customers, Mr. Sidney Berg?
He is good and very polite.
Has Brad Stevens ever raised his voice in frustration or anger at the customers?
No, he's not.
In the time Mr. Stevens has worked for you, Mr. Berg, has Brad Stevens ever shown any act of violence to anyone?
No, he has not.
Mr. Berg, is Brad irresponsible at work?
No, actually, he was the opposite. He's very reliable and prompt.
Compared to your other workers, does Brad stand out, Mr. Sidney Berg?
Yes, he does.
Mr. Berg, has Brad ever received a promotion?
Yes, he has.
Mr. Berg, how long did it take for Mr. Brad Stevens to receive this promotion?
Around 3 months.
Does everyone receive a promotion in 3 months at your company?
No, they don't.
Have you, Mr. Berg, ever lied to protect the stability of your store?
No, I have not.
May I have a 10-second recess to consult with my
Yes, you may.
co-counsel? No further questions, Your Honor.
Thank you, Ms. Olson. Ms. Graham. Prosecution, would you like to cross-examine the witness?
Yes, I would, Your Honor.
Ms. Olson, step forward. Okay.
Your Honor, could you please instruct the witness to answer yes or no only, please?
Mr. Berg, would you please answer all the questions with yes or no only?
How are you today, Mr. Berg?
Yes.
Quiet, please.
Are you the owner of Big Wheel Motorcycle Shop?
Yes, I am.
Would you say that Brad Stevens is a good worker?
Yes, I would.
Okay, is he pretty flexible with his hours?
Yes.
Have you ever noticed him having any problems with his vision?
No, I have not.
Mr. Berg, you like owning a business, don't you?
Yes, I do.
Okay. And the key to any good business is having good employees, isn't it?
True.
Okay. Mr. Berg, would you say that you're a pretty strict employer?
No.
Your Honor, can I please approach the bench, please?
Sure. Lawyers from both sides, please.
In his testimony, it says that he is a strict employee and that he keeps it tight.
Well, that question doesn't...
I'm going into other questions. I'm reading to another question.
Well, that's true, but then he can't remember all the questions that you're asking.
But he has to stick to the facts.
He's nervous.
He is.
He's nervous.
Well, the point is that if the witness, you should have, instructed him to answer all the questions to the point and to the fact, but it's just, something.
Thank you, Your Honor.
You may be seated.
Excuse me, just 1 second, Your Honor. From now on, don't cover up the microphone. We'd like to get that on tape, what you guys talking about.
Okay, since the fact sheet states that you are a strict employer, because of this, do you feel that Brad Stevens, the defendant, might be intimidated by you?
Objection. Calls for an opinion.
Objection sustained. Would you please disregard the last question and answer?
Do you think he might act differently at work?
No.
Mr. Berg, are you at the shop every day when Mr. Stevens is working?
Yes, I am.
Every minute?
Yes.
Do you know what he, have you ever gone out with Brad on a social or personal basis?
No, I have not.
So how would you know how he acts when he's around his friends or unsupervised?
Objection. Calls for conclusion.
Objection sustained. Please disregard the last question and answer.
If Brad Stevens were to be found guilty of this misdemeanor and he were to go to jail, you would lose a good employee, therefore affecting your business and leaving you to look for another employee. So in order to avoid all of this hassle...
Objection, Your Honor.
Objection sustained.
It's not a question, Your Honor. It wasn't
Would you
a
please
question.
summarize that?
Please.
Okay, first of all, lawyer, she's about to testify. They're to ask questions.
You're not allowed to testify your own questions.
Okay. So, in other words, if Brad Stevens were to go to jail, you would have to find another employee, correct?
Yes.
And isn't it hard finding good employees?
Yes.
Okay, so this would put you at an inconvenience, wouldn't it?
Yes.
Okay. Since you have something to lose, wouldn't that make you biased in Brad's favor?
Yes.
Okay, thank you, Your Honor. I have no further questions.
Thank you. Ms. Berg, you may be seated. Defense, you may call your next witness.
The defense would like to call Ms. Jacqueline Barty to the stands.
Ms. Bargan, would you please approach the witness stand? Bailiff, please swear in the witness.
Raise your right hand. You swear to tell the truth, nothing but the truth, say I will.
I will.
Please say it first, maybe spell the last.
Jacqueline, B-A-R-D-I-E.
You may begin your questioning, Ms. Holden.
May I approach the bench?
Yeah, sure.
Good morning, Ms. Barty. How are you this morning? I'm the defense attorney for Brad Stevens. I'm going to ask you a few questions. I just want you to relax and tell the honest truth. If you do not understand the question, please do not be afraid to say so. Ms. Barty, do you attend school?
Yes, I do.
Where do you attend school, Ms. Barty?
South High School.
Are you acquainted with Brad Stevens?
Yes, I am.
Can you please point out Mr. Brad Stevens in the courtroom, please? Would the court please note that the witness has just pointed out the defendant?
The record was shown.
Do you know what perjury is?
Yes, I do.
Would you ever commit perjury to protect someone?
No, I would not.
How long have you been acquainted with Mr. Brad Stevens?
About 2 years.
In the time that you've been acquainted with Brad, Would you say that Brad is a violent person?
No, I wouldn't.
Ms. Barty, would you please speak?
Why did you and Brad quit dating?
He stopped calling.
Would you date Brad Stevens again if he called?
Yes, I would.
Miss Barty, do you recall the evening of June 4th, 1994?
Yes, I do.
Where were you that evening, Miss Barty?
Melanie's video arcade.
Do you know at approximately what time you arrived there?
7:30.
Do you remember what you were doing then?
Yes, I do.
What were you doing then?
I was playing a few games, and then about after half an hour, I went over to the drinking area.
While you were getting a drink, did you see anything unusual?
Yes, I saw Brad Stevens and his date by the waterfront.
Yeah, Your Honor, you need to instruct the witnesses to speak up. They're just not being heard in back.
Ms. Barty, members of the jury can't hear you.
You have to
Please
project your voice out loud.
speak up a little bit.
While you were at the drinking fountain, did you see anything unusual?
Yes, I did. I saw Brad Stevens and his date, and he was washing his hands in the water fountain.
Okay, after seeing Brad washing his hand, did you see anything else after this incident?
Yes, I saw Martin Mann and his date, Connie, walking towards them.
Miss Barty, how far were you from the drinking fountain where Brad was standing?
About 10 feet.
Miss Barty, would you say it was dimly lit in the arcade?
Yes, I would.
If Martin were coming at you as he was coming at Brad, would you be frightened?
Yes, I would.
How did Brad react to Mr. Martin Mann's frightening movement?
Brad picked up a piece of wood and hit Martin across the face.
What happened after Brad struck Mr. Mann?
Martin fell on the ground and Brad ran outside.
Why do you think Mr. Brad Stevens ran?
I think he was frightened.
Would you ever lie to protect a friend, Miss Barty?
No, I would not.
Thank you, Miss Barty. Your Honor, the defense has no further questions.
Thank you. Prosecution, would you like to cross-examine the witness?
Yes, I would, Your Honor. Can I please approach the witness?
Yes, you may approach the witness. The witness.
Your Honor, can you please instruct the witness to answer yes or no only?
Ms. Barty, would you please answer all the questions with yes or no only?
Yes. Ms. Barty, are you a student at South High School?
Yes, I am.
And do you know the defendant, Brad Stevens?
Yes, I do.
Okay. You unstated him, right?
Yes.
And isn't it true that Brad Stevens basically forgot about you because he never called you back?
No.
But he never called you back, right?
Right.
Okay. Ms. Barty, were you at Melanie's video arcade the night of June 4th, 1994?
Yes, I was.
Okay. Did you see Brad Stevens and Tanya Morgan playing the Frogger game?
No, I did not.
Okay. And so you don't know exactly what happened before the second incident, right?
Correct.
Okay. You said you noticed Mr. Mann walking directly towards the door, correct?
No.
Did you say you saw him walking towards the water fountain?
Yes.
And isn't it a fact that Mr. Stevens is standing very close to the door?
Yes.
So couldn't Mr. Mann have been walking toward the door?
Yes.
In your previous statement, you said that it looked like Mr. Mann was going to do something to Mr. Stevens.
Yes.
Now then, Mr. Mann had a wallet in his hand. How could he possibly hurt Mr. Stevens with the leather wallet?
Well, I didn't.
But did you see Mr. Stevens pick up the piece of wood, Exhibit A?
Yes, I did.
Okay. Did you try to warn Mr. Mann about Mr. Stevens' attack?
No.
Okay. So you could have actually prevented Mr. Mann from being attacked, right?
Objection. That's an opinion.
Objection overruled. She was just asking a simple question that needs to be answered.
So you could have actually prevented the attack from taking place, am I correct?
Yes.
And you chose to remain quiet because maybe Mr. Stevens would be angry with you later. Am I correct? You chose to remain quiet?
Speak up, Ms. Barty.
Yes, I did choose to remain quiet.
Now, if you had warned Mr. Mann about the attack, do you think Mr. Stevens might have been angry with you?
Objection calls for conclusion.
Objection overruled. You may continue.
Do you think Mr. Stevens would have been angry with you?
No.
No. He wouldn't have been angry if you had interfered in his plan.
No.
Thank you, Your Honor. No further questions. Oh, can I have a 10-second recess to consider that?
Yes, you may.
Thank you, Your Honor. No further questions.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Barty. You may be seated now. Defense, you may call your next witness.
The defense would like to call Mr. Brad Stevens to the stand.
Mr. Stephen, would you please approach the witness stand? Bailiff, please swear in the witness.
Raise your right hand. You swear to tell the truth, nothing but the truth, say I will. Please say your first name and spell the last.
Brad, S-T-E-V-E-N-S.
You may be seated.
Ms. Graham, you may continue your questions.
May I approach the witness stand?
Yes, you don't have to ask for any more permission. You can approach the witness anytime.
Thank you, Your Honor. Mr. Stevens, being the defendant, it is understandable that you may be nervous about your testimony, but I would like you to try and relax. When I ask you a question, Mr. Stevens, I want you to answer the truth loud enough so the jury will be able to hear you. If for some reason you do not comprehend a question I am asking, please let me know so I might repeat the question or rephrase it to your understanding. Is all of this clear?
Yes.
Mr. Stevens, do you attend school?
Yes, I do.
Where do you attend school, Mr. Stevens?
South High.
Speak up, Mr. Stevens.
South High.
Brad, Mr. Stevens, can you tell me where you are on the night of June 4th at approximately 7:30 p.m.?
I was picking up Tony Morgan.
After you picked up Tanya Morgan, where did you go, Mr. Stevens?
I went to the Melanie's video game.
Did you play any video games?
Yes, I did.
Mr. Stevens, were you playing any in particular video game?
Yes, I did. I played Frogger.
And Mr. Stevens, for any reason did you leave this video game?
Yes, I did. I ran out of change and I had to go get some change to play.
When you, Brad Stevens, returned to Frogger, did you continue to play the game?
No, I did not.
Mr. Stevens, can you tell me why you did not continue to play your game?
Because the machine was occupied.
Would you please speak up, Mr. Stevens, so they can hear you in the back?
You might speak into the microphone a little
Yeah.
closer and really speak out loud, if you will, Mr. Stevens.
Because the machine was occupied by Martin Man.
Mr. Stevens, had you ever met Martin Mann before this evening?
No, I did not.
Mr. Stevens, did you attempt to ask Mr. Mann to try another video game so that you can continue with the Frogger game you had already been playing?
Yes.
And how did Mr. Mann react to your polite response?
Repeat the question again, Mr.
How did Mr. Mann react to your polite response?
He asked me to go and play another game.
For any reason, did he call you an awful name or a...
Yes, he did.
What did he call you?
He called me a jackass.
Quiet, please.
Mr. Stevens, how did you respond to Mr. Mann's awful remark?
I just wanted to play the game.
When you, Brad, tried to play the game, what did Mr. Mann do?
He pushed me down to the floor because I sprained my wrist and scraped my elbow.
So you were injured when you fell.
Yes.
Did you try and fight back at this time?
No, I did not.
Why didn't you?
I was afraid.
Why were you so frightened, Mr. Stevens?
I just wasn't in the mood to fight.
Did he make a threat after he pushed you down?
Yes, he did.
Can you tell me what that threat was?
He said if he'll see me again, he'll beat me up.
Is that what scared you, Mr. Stevens?
Yes.
After Martin Mann had threatened you, what did you do since you were too afraid to want to fight back at this time?
Can you repeat the question?
I sure can. After Martin had threatened you, where did you go since you were too afraid to fight back at this time?
I went to the fountain to wash my elbow.
While at the drinking fountain, did you notice anything threatening?
Yes, I did. I saw Martin Man coming toward me quickly. And he was taking something out of his back pocket.
Mr. Mann, can you tell me what he was pulling out of his pocket?
I don't know. I couldn't see
Why couldn't you see?
because it was dark and I just couldn't see.
Mr. Stevens, what makes you believe that Martin was coming after you?
Well, because he threatened me.
Okay, he threatens you? Okay. Did Mr. Mann show any signs of attacking you?
Yeah, well, just like I said, he was coming towards me quickly.
Okay. Mr. Stevens, did you strike Mr. Mann?
Yes, I did.
Can you tell me what you struck Mr. Mann with?
That piece of wood.
Okay. Let the court understand that Mr. Stevens, the defendant, has just identified prosecution exhibit A.
The record will show.
Why did you strike Mr. Mann?
Because I was afraid. I was afraid he was gonna hit me.
Once you strike Mr. Mann, what did you do then?
I ran away.
And why did you run away?
Well, because I was afraid he was gonna come up and go after me.
We can't hear you, Mr. Stephen.
Because I was afraid he was gonna come up and go after me.
Okay, and once you heard the owner calling you, did you immediately stop?
Yes, I did.
Mr. Stevens, did you know that as a citizen you have a right to defend yourself and others if you feel threatened?
Yes, I do.
Is that why you struck Mr. Mann?
Yes.
No further questions, Your Honor.
Thank you, Ms. Grant. Prosecution, would you like to cross-examine the witness?
Yes, you would, Your Honor. May I see the first witness?
Please.
Hello, Mr. Stevens. How are you today?
Fine.
I know you must be a little nervous since I am the cross-examining attorney, but just remember that you're under oath and the truth is very important. Okay, Your Honor, can you please instruct the witness to answer yes or no?
Mr. Stephen, would you please answer all the questions with yes or no only?
Were you at Melanie's video arcade the night of June 4th, 1994?
Yes, I was.
And you were playing the Frogger game, am I correct?
Yes.
Ms. Morgan was watching you.
Yeah.
After a while, you had lost all of your frogs and had no more quarters left, am I right?
Yes.
Okay. Then you proceeded to go to the change machine some 30 feet away, right?
Yeah.
At this point, the Frogger game was unoccupied. Am I correct?
Yes, you are.
Okay. Isn't it true that when you came back, you saw Mr. Mann and Miss Cook playing your game? Did you see Mr. Mann and Miss Cook playing your game when you arrived?
Yes, I did.
Okay. Mr. Stevens, isn't it true that the Frogger game does not belong to you and belongs to Melanie's video arcade?
Yes.
Okay.
Speak up, Mr. Stephen.
Yes.
So you had no authority over that game, am I correct?
Yeah.
But you still tried to shoulder your way between Mr. Mann and the machine, am I correct?
No.
May I please approach the bench, Your Honor?
Sure. Lawyers from both sides, please. Lawyers from both sides.
Actually, Jordan said that he had tried to keep away between that man and the game.
You should instruct your witness to be to the point.
Be aware
And
of
that,
everything. Do you want me to
yeah.
do that now?
Well, no, not now, but later.
Okay.
I mean, you're not gonna call him back.
Okay, in the fact sheet, it does state that you tried to shoulder your way between the machine and Mr. Mann. Okay, so in actuality, you forced yourself upon Mr. Mann.
Yeah.
Couldn't you have suggested to play the winner, maybe?
I did.
You suggested to him that you wanted to play the winner.
Oh, no.
Then Mr. Mann, then when Mr. Mann tried to get you off of him, he like pushed you away, right?
Yes, he did.
Okay. And you fell.
Yeah.
Were you embarrassed?
No.
Then you got up to wash your hand, right?
Yeah.
And when you were washing your hand, did you notice someone walking towards the door or towards that direction?
Yes, I did.
Okay, was it Mr. Mann and his friend Kearny Cook?
Yeah.
At this time, Mr. Mann had pulled out his wallet and was looking at it. Let me show you the wallet. Prosecution Exhibit B. Black leather wallet. Okay, he was looking at his wallet then, am I correct?
I didn't see.
Okay, you didn't see. And Mr. Mann, when he testified, he had said that he didn't know who hit him. So, if he didn't know who hit him, didn't you in actuality hit a man who was unaware of what was going on and was unarmed?
Yeah.
Mr. Stephen, would you please speak up so the members jury can hear you?
Yes, I guess so.
Did you think of doing anything else at the time instead of just picking up the wood and smashing it?
No, I couldn't think of anything else.
Did you think of yelling for help or anything?
Couldn't have helped. No one was around.
Mr. Cervantes was there.
Not at that time.
He was at the desk. He was right here. You were right here. Have you ever
I
taken
didn't
any?
see him.
Just a yes or no will do. Have you ever taken any classes in self-defense?
No.
Okay. So you don't have any kind of knowledge in how to properly defend yourself without serious injury?
No, I do not.
Okay, Your Honor, can I have a 10-second recess?
Sure. You may have 10 seconds.
Okay, earlier in your previous testimony, you said that you are not in the mood to fight. But didn't you in fact hit Mr. Mann with a prosecution exhibit A?
Well, yes, I did, but it was a self-defense.
Just a yes or no will do, Mr. Mann. Can you please instruct him to answer yes or no?
Ms. Stephen, please answer all the questions with yes or no.
Yeah, Mr. Stevens, is this a piece of wood that you used? Can you please hold that, please?
Yes.
Okay. Can you please stand up and show the court how you hit Mr. Mann? Pretend I'm Mr. Mann.
Quiet, please.
Objection, Your Honor. It asks.
Overruled. Never mind. Go ahead.
What's the point? He doesn't say anything.
Would you say that you used force when striking Mr. Mann?
Yeah.
Okay. Did you ask Mr. Mann if you could swing the 2x2 and hit his nose? Did you ask him?
Objection, Your Honor. Calls for an opinion.
Objection sustained. Disregard the last question and answer, please.
And isn't it true that Exhibit A is the object that you used?
Yes.
So you did use an object?
Yeah.
Okay. Didn't you produce bodily harm to Mr. Mann?
Yes, I did.
Okay, so you just proved yourself that you were guilty of the California Penal Code 245. Thank you, Your Honor. No further questions.
Thank you, Mr. Stephen.
Your
You may
Honor,
be seated.
she's not allowed to state her opinions, so that should be.
Objection sustained. Please disregard the last answer. Instruction.
Can't say anything, huh? That sucks. That's way after, Your Honor.
Mr. DeLeo, you may watch your language, please.
Thank you.
Defense, you may call your next witness.
The defense rests, Your Honor.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, let me remind you that you're not to talk to any lawyers, witnesses, or have any access to any outside information. Court is adjourned until 7:30 tomorrow morning.
Yeah.
Friday. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Is Miss Phillips' class coming?
think so. I don't think nobody's coming to that. I think he's just doing it in front of everybody. Oh, yeah.
This one's gonna touch you. I'll give it to her and see if she could just.
Okay, what we've done is we've changed this one because it was taking a risk. Or would you have stopped it before it started?
We changed it.
It said, would you have used your right as a citizen
Okay, that's
to defend yourself?
Or would you just let things happen? If you want to
If
change
you
it,
can change it,
that doesn't
if
sound
you
right.
can find something at the end, like just let things happen, you can find something that's a little better than that.
All my notes are put in order.
I didn't read that yet. I didn't read it, so I didn't have to know.
No, don't
It was
worry.
only
As
2
long as
days.
you can read it.
Yeah. 2, 3, 4, 5. Nope. I lost my pencil. Can I use your eraser? Hey, there's my 3 for Mr. Richards.
Oh, well. Should I put all that? Should I just leave it right?
Yeah, just leave it.
Can't we have nothing to read anyway?
Oh, one. Hey, son, man. That's pretty hard.
Excuse me, Josh. Thank you.
All right. According to the state of California, County of San Diego, Department of 503, the Honorable Judge assigned presiding. Court is now in session. Please be seated and come on.
Good morning, attorneys and ladies and gentlemen of the jury. Today we'll be hearing the third day of the trial of State of California versus defendant Mr. Stephen. And now we're ready to continue. Bailiff, please swear in the jury.
All right. Raise your right hand. Repeat after me. I promise to listen carefully to the evidence in this case. And I will base my decision on guilty or not guilty only on that evidence.
Defense, are you prepared to give your closing statement?
Yes.
Good morning, Your Honor, ladies and gentlemen of the jury. Now that you've heard all of the evidence, now that you've seen all of the evidence and heard all of the witnesses' testimonies, ask yourself, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, has the prosecution convinced you beyond a reasonable doubt that the defendant, Brad Stevens, is guilty of assault and battery? It's your turn to decide. But before you do, let me make your decision a little easier by pointing out a number of inconsistencies from the prosecution's witnesses. The first is Connie Cook. When asked by the prosecution, why didn't she warn Mr. Mann, she replied, I thought he'd seen me, meaning I thought Mr. Mann saw Mr. Stevens with a stick. Then when asked,
by the defense, did Mr. Mann see the stick? She replied, no, he didn't see the stick. Note, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, Ms. Cook has now lied under oath, therefore committing perjury. Another example of Ms. Cook's testimony is when asked, did you have to restrain Mr. Mann from further injuring Mr. Stevens again? She replied, yes. Now, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, if Mr. Mann was only trying to help Mr. Stevens up after pushing him down, why then did it take two women to hold him back? The second was Martin Mann, the key witness for the prosecution. Mr. Mann testified, as did Ms. Cook, that the fountain and the door are near each other. When asked, isn't it possible that Mr. Stevens believed that you were coming after him, he said yes. And when asked, could he defend himself, he also said yes. So, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, Mr. Mann is simply saying that, in fact, he was going after Mr. Stevens on the night of June 4th. The final inconsistent witness is Richard Cervantes. His complete testimony has led us to believe that he is an incredible witness. Now, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, let's remember, and the facts will show, that Mr. Cervantes was looking through a brochure and looked up just in time to see Mr. Mann hit with the piece of wood, making Mr. Cervantes unaware of why Mr. Stevens hit Mr. Mann, and therefore making him and his testimony irrelevant to the case. His last mistake is when asked, were Mr. Mann and Ms. Cook coming towards you or going to the fountain? He replied, I don't know. Now, a witness of credibility would be able to establish whether a person is coming towards you or not, which is an important factor in this case. Let me explain what self-defense is and how it applies to Mr. Stevens. Mr. Stevens may assert the self-defense privilege even though he may have been mistaken as to the actuality of the attack. Mr. Stevens honestly believed that it was necessary for him to use force in self-defense. Let me remind you that Mr. Mann has testified to pushing my client, Mr. Stevens, to the floor and making him sprain his wrist and scrape his hand. In this situation, Mr. Stevens is recommended by the law to retreat as far as he can safely go. And on the night of June 4th, that's exactly what he did. Mr. Stevens went to the fountain where he thought he was safe, only to turn around and see Mr. Mann coming at him rapidly. Saving himself and Miss Morgan, Mr. Stevens defended himself the best way possible. Witnesses have testified and lawyers have stated that the arcade is dimly lit, therefore making it possible Mr. Stevens seen something other than a wallet. Also note that when Mr. Cervantes stopped Mr. Stevens, he no longer proceeded to run. He willingly came back to the scene. Now, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, what would you have done on the night of June 4th? Would you have used the same right as an American citizen to defend yourself, or would you have just let things happen? Make your decision based on the testimony and bring us back a verdict, a fair verdict of not guilty. We appreciate your time and your willingness. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Mr. Maxine. Prosecution, are you ready to present your closing statement?
Morning, Your Honor. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen of the jury. Today is the day when each one of you, jury member, gets to be just as important to this trial. Your verdict of guilty will help us put away one less criminal from our society. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, let me read the statement of charges. Assault with a deadly weapon, California Penal Code, Section 245. The use of force or violence upon the person of another without consent committed with an object used in such a manner as to be capable of producing and likely to produce death or bodily harm. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, based on the testimony of the witnesses, the facts clearly show the defendant, Brad Stevens, is guilty. If you can recall in the testimony given by Jacqueline Barty, the defense witness, stated that Martin Mann did not show any aggressiveness walking toward the front. Let the facts show that she could have warned the victim, but she chose to be silent. Let the facts show that the defendant, Brad Stevens, had time to identify the object Martin Mann was holding in his hand within the proximity of 10 feet. There can be no reason but doubt. The evidence clearly showed that the defendant, Brad Stevens, used a 2x2 wooden stick in smashing the nose of Martin Mann. Did the defendant have the consent of the victim to strike him with a piece of wood, ladies and gentlemen of the jury? No. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, we know you have heard lots of testimony this last few days. The evidence and facts you were given by the witnesses and my co-counselor and I will help you reach a fair verdict of guilty. We have proven that the defendant intentionally acted to get his revenge by assault with a deadly weapon. During the testimony of the defense witness, there was clear inconsistency, especially in the testimony of the defendant, Brad Stevens himself. And we all know why there was so much inconsistency. It's because Brad Stevens himself, in fact, assaulted Mark Mann. He admitted it himself. If the defendant, Brad Stevens, had no eye problems, he could have easily identified what was around him. If you can recall that the defendant over here says that he can, there's a dimly lit and has no eye problem, how could he say that he can't see and nothing around him? Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, now is the important time for you to remember in reaching a fair verdict. We believe when you come back from the deliberating room, you will unanimously find the defendant, Brad Stevens, is guilty of assault with a deadly weapon. Thank you for your time, ladies and gentlemen of the jury. That's all.
Thank you, Mr. Wong. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, now that you've heard from both prosecution, defense attorneys, and the witnesses, I expect you to make your verdicts on the evidence presented by both sides of the arguments, and your emotions should not interfere with this decision. But before you may leave, I'd rather read the charges for you again so you would like you refresh your memory. The charge of this case is the state of California. First, Mr. Brad Stevens. Mr. Brad Stevens is charged in assault with a deadly weapon violating Section 245 of the California Penal Code, which states the use of force or violence upon the person of another without consent committed when an object used in such a manner as to be capable of producing and likely to produce death or great bodily harm. And if you find the defendant did commit the act, assault and battery, without the legal defense, you must find the defendant guilty. And if you believe the defendant had a legal defense, you should bring a verdict not guilty. Now, jury members may go to jury deliberation.
All right.
Okay, it's customary for the lawyers to shake hands. I'd like the prosecution lawyers to stand up, go over here to the defense lawyers and shake hands with each other.
Make sure you get the jury when they come in. We like to see their faces to guess which way they voted.
Give a big smile. They do.
I don't think you can do it. I think you'll have to do it.
You gotta do it, guys.
Are we in the way? Someone in the way? Okay, Mike.
Alrighty, Mike.
Have you reached a verdict yet, members of the jury?
Yes, with Your Honor.
The court wants to hear your decision.
We plead the defendant, Brad Stevens, is guilty.
Yeah.
Your Honor, we'd like for the jury members to take a poll.
Jury members, each of you please stand up and say how you.
Guilty.
Guilty. Guilty.
Guilty.
Quiet, please.
Now you have the defendant stand up when you sing.
Mr. Brad Stevens, would you please stand up? Since the defendant, Mr. Brad Stevens, is found guilty, he is being sentenced to 6 months in prison in addition with $20,000 fine. Court is adjourned.
Okay.
Me neither.
Last couple things I want to
Jury
say.
members don't say anything.
I know it's very frustrating. Just a minute, class. For the jury. I know there are a couple real strong personalities in there. You guys must have really had to do some talking to convince them. And sometimes jury members don't feel good about what happens when they come out of a jury. My wife was a foreman of a jury recently,